I'm Jennifer Darrell, otherwise known as La Profesora Inspiradora, and today I want to talk to you about how to create differentiated reading assessments that more accurately reflect your students' abilities in Spanish. A few years back, I had the privilege of attending the NECTFEL conference where I was able to go to a presentation by Leslie Gran. If you don't know her, she's absolutely fantastic. You should definitely look her up. She has so many great ideas and so many great materials. And the workshop that I attended was on differentiating reading activities in the classroom. And I was completely inspired, went back, started incorporating it into my classes, and got to thinking that it would be better if I could not only incorporate differentiation into my reading activities, but also into the assessments that I did of my students at the end of each unit. If I asked all of my students to work with the same text on their reading assessments, then I wasn't going to be capturing fully the level of their proficiency in reading comprehension in Spanish. For example, if I had a student who was struggling a little bit and couldn't quite handle texts that would be considered on level, then that would affect their ability to perform on every portion of the reading assessment. Maybe I had a student who was absolutely fantastic at deciphering the meaning of unknown words using the context, but if I give them a text in which too great of a percentage of those words are unknown, they're not going to have enough context to work with, and I'll never get to see their skills in figuring out those unknown words simply because I gave them a text that was too challenging. Whereas if I had given them a text that was at their level, then they would be able to show me all of the things that they can do in Spanish. And on the other end of the spectrum, with my superstars, if I'm giving them texts that are much easier than what they're able to handle at that moment, I'm placing an upper limit on their proficiency level and not seeing the full range of what they're able to do. So I was completely convinced, and still am, that differentiating my reading assessments was really important. The question is how to do it. And anybody who knows me knows that I have a tendency to go a little bit crazy with my ideas. I get very inspired and I think of these things that I think are either going to be pedagogically fantastic or just really super fun, and they end up being complicated and challenging and logistically impossible to pull off. And I was worried that I was working myself into one of these situations again. After all, if I had, let's say, 3 different reading texts, an on-level text, a below-level text, and a challenge text, would I then have to write 3 sets of comprehension questions, 3 sets of interpretation questions, figure out how to photocopy that all, figure out who was getting which, and how to make sure that each person got the right questions to go with the right text, and then what was I going to do with all of that paper? It was just starting to seem a little bit like a nightmare, and I wasn't sure how I'd handle it. So I thought a little bit, and I came up with a system that I think has worked really well, and I wanted to share it with you in case you want to work some differentiation into your assessments as well, because it lets me create these multi-leveled assessments without going insane, and it keeps the paper under control and has actually been a pretty manageable system. So first I pick my texts. So this would be an example of an on-level text for a particular unit I do with my students on gender roles. And I find a text that's a little bit less challenging, fewer words, more familiar vocabulary. And then a text that I would consider a challenge text. We can see there's more words, it covers more topics, there's more unfamiliar vocabulary. So I have a good range of text there. Now, how am I going to test my students without having to create 3 completely different tests for them? Well, my first strategy is simply to ask them to summarize the text for me. So my first question, as you can see on my assessment, is if a friend who doesn't speak Spanish asked you what this reading passage is about, how would you summarize it for him or her in 1 or 2 sentences? That lets me see that they have comprehended the main idea of the text. It lets me see what their ability is to differentiate between the main idea and the supporting details. And I don't have to go crazy creating comprehension questions for 3 separate texts because I let them be the ones to determine the content. The next strategy I use is one of my absolute favorites. I use highlighters. So on each of the texts that I hand out, you can see I've highlighted some of the words in orange, I've highlighted some of the words in green. This lets me ask one question to all of the students, and because their text is highlighted, they're going to be answering it in accordance with the text that they're working with, and I don't have to create three separate answer sheets. So for example, I have them look for the words that are highlighted in orange and make a guess as to what they mean using their context. So that's where I'm looking for their linguistic interpretation, and I don't have to write out the words and make three separate photocopied sheets, because all they have to do is find the highlighted words and they're good to go. Then with the green words, I have them decide which two. You can see on each text I have 4 words highlighted in green, and I ask my students to tell me, if you didn't know any of these words, which 2 would you feel were most essential for understanding the text? Which 2 would you feel were less essential for getting the main idea of that text? So by using highlighting, I've been able to ask the same question to all of my students, and they'll have the ability to adapt it to the text they're working with. The next strategy I use is that I have the answers for one sheet be the red herrings or the distractors for the other readings. So this works really well with multiple choice questions. For example, I ask students, of the following details listed below, which ones appear in the reading passage? So this is a way that I'm checking their comprehension. Do they understand what's actually being said in the text? And I have 9 answers here. 3 of them are taken from each reading passage. So if I was doing a question like this, even if I weren't differentiating, I would have some answers that were correct and some answers that were wrong. In this case, it just happens that the answers that are wrong for one of my texts are the correct answers for another one of my texts. So I can create one question that covers all 3 readings without going insane. I do the same thing with my interpretation questions. So, for example, one of my questions is, which of the following inferences could best be made as a result of reading this text? And then they have to justify their answer. And just like I would do if I were only creating one version, I want to have one answer that I think is the best answer, and then a couple of distractor answers that are not meant to be the best answer. And once again, I've chosen the answer that I think is best for one text, and then the other 2 will be the answers that are best for the other text. So I only have to create the set of questions once, and all 3 reading passages are covered with that one set of questions. And the great thing there is, because I'm having students justify their answer, if they come up with a different answer than what I was thinking, I can still give them credit for that, and I can still understand if they've really understood their reading passage or not. So that would be some of the techniques that I use in order to create one set of questions and answers that can work for 3 different leveled readings. And it has let me better see what level my students are working on. I work this into my grading rubric as one line of the rubric. What text type? So are you working on level? Great, you get 3 points. Are you working above level? That's 4 points. Are you doing the not quite there yet text? And that's 2 points. And that way they're only reflecting their text type proficiency in one line of the grading rubric, and it's not spilling out and holding them back or keeping them from achieving in areas like their comprehension or their linguistic interpretation or their ability to do higher level thinking tasks with those texts. So it's a great way for me to more accurately see what my students are capable of, and I don't spend hours at the photocopier, and I know we can all appreciate that. So if you try this out, let me know how it works for you, and thank you for watching.